She bit Martinez clean through the glove last Tuesday. Whole hand. He's still on light duty. The second worker didn't look up from his intake sheet. Doesn't matter. Dawson already flagged her. She's got maybe 3 days. Neither of them was talking to the old man at the chain link. He was just there. Wheat-colored jacket, collar up, arms hanging still at his coat pockets. Had been there since before the gate unlocked. The kind of man you stop noticing after a few seconds. The way you stop noticing a gate post. The Malinois in the isolation yard had been pacing for 11 days straight, according to the intake board. Right now she wasn't pacing. She was facing the wire. The old man had a keychain in his right hand. He'd been turning it over slowly, a salt-bleached fishing lure. One hook bent straight, but somewhere in the last 30 seconds, his hand had gone completely quiet. The shelter opened at 7:30. Roland Ludwig had been at the chain link since 6. Maya Chen, one of the morning intake workers, noticed him when she pulled into the lot. She'd noticed him yesterday too, and the day before that. She had not mentioned it to anyone because there was nothing technically wrong with a man standing at a fence. People did strange things around animals. Grief made people strange. She'd learned that in her first week. But this man didn't look like grief. He looked like a man on watch. She watched him through the break room window while she made coffee, and the thing that kept snagging her attention wasn't what he was doing. It was what he wasn't doing. He wasn't calling to the dog. Wasn't making the soft, encouraging sounds people made. Wasn't reaching through the chain link the way half the volunteers did, which they weren't supposed to do and did anyway. He was just there, weight settled, back straight without being stiff, head angled so that both the yard and the parking lot behind him stayed in his peripheral. His canvas jacket was the color of dry wheat, collar turned up, elbows worn pale, the kind of jacket that had been through seasons, multiple kinds of seasons. The dog was facing him. That was the thing Maya kept coming back to. The Malinois had been a wall of noise and motion for 11 days, lunging, pacing, cycling the same path along the fence until the concrete was dusty from her track. Every time Maya walked the corridor, the dog threw herself at the gate. Every time the county director came through, the dog pressed herself into the back corner and went rigid in a way that made everyone uneasy. Right now, she was standing 4 feet from the wire, square to the old man, ears soft, weight forward on her front feet. Not a threat posture, not submissive, something else entirely. Like she was listening for a frequency no one else could receive. The shelter unlocked at 7:32. Roland came in without hurry, boots quiet on the concrete, and asked the front desk for the intake paperwork on the Belgian Malinois in Isolation Yard C. Maya was the one who pulled it. She set the folder on the counter and watched his hands when he opened it. They were an old man's hands, rope-scarred across the knuckles, one finger crooked at the second joint where it had healed slightly wrong. But the way he turned the pages was careful in a specific way she didn't have words for yet. Not careful the way people are careful with something unfamiliar. Careful the way surgeons are careful, or the way her grandfather used to handle the mechanism of his watch. An economy of motion that meant he understood exactly what he was touching and exactly what it could do. He read without expression, turned to the second page. Read that too. His right hand drifted to his jacket pocket and came back with the keychain, and his thumb found the lure without looking. Salt pale. One hook bent flat from where it had actually caught something, or something had worked against it in the dark. He turned it twice, slow, then set his hand on the counter and let the lure rest in his palm. "Who made the euthanasia determination?" he asked. "Director Dawson," Maya said. "He's in at 9. Roland nodded. Once. He closed the folder and slid it back to her with 2 fingers, and that small, precise motion, papers returned, the way a man returns a map he has already memorized, made Maya look at him more carefully than she had before. "I'll wait," he said. He walked to the single plastic chair by the wall and sat down, and the keychain went back to moving in his fingers, lure turning over slow and quiet, the way a man counts something he has counted 10,000 times before. The intake worker, the young one, whose name tag said Cora, came back in 11 minutes. She had a folder with her, and she set it on the counter without opening it. "Mr. Ludwig, Hal can take you back." Hal Roth was maybe 60, with the build of a man who had done physical work once and kept the habits of it. He wore a volunteer vest over a flannel shirt, and he moved through the kennel corridor the way people do when they've memorized every inch of it, not looking where he put his feet, arms relaxed, fingers open. He glanced at Roland once, measured something quietly, and then unlocked the door at the end of the corridor without explaining what was behind it. Roland already knew. The isolation yard was a concrete rectangle, maybe 40 feet by 20, with a chain-link wall on 3 sides and the back of the shelter building on the 4th. No shade. A water bowl in the corner, with half an inch of water in it. The Malinois was in the far end, and when the gate opened, she hit the opposite fence in one movement. Not toward them, away. She pressed her body flat to the wire and tracked Roland with her eyes without making a sound. That was worse than barking. Hal noticed Roland notice it. "I'll just be out in the corridor," Hal said. Roland didn't answer. He waited for the gate to close behind him, and then he crouched down. Not halfway, all the way down, weight on his heels, back straight, both hands resting open on his knees. He looked at the ground 6 feet in front of him, not at the dog. Hal watched from the corridor window and didn't understand what he was seeing. The dog paced the far end once, then twice, then she stopped. She turned her head and looked at the man crouching in the dirt with his eyes on the ground, and something shifted, a small thing, a reduction in the set of her shoulders, the weight moving fractionally off her back haunches. 1 minute, then another. Roland raised his right hand, palm open, and made a single slow gesture, not pointing, not beckoning, something in between, a flat, lateral movement that started at his chest and swept outward and stopped. It meant nothing to Hal. He frowned at it, turned it over in his head. He had seen hand signals before, working dogs on a leash, the usual obedience stuff. Sit, stay, come. This was not that. It was more precise. The economy of it was different, like the difference between someone who has read about a thing and someone who did it in the dark. The dog took 4 steps toward him. She stopped. Her nose dropped twice, reading the air at ground level. Then she crossed the rest of the distance and pushed her muzzle against Roland's open palm. He let her smell the back of his hand first, then the palm. His other hand came up from below, slow, and pressed flat against the side of her neck, and he held it there while she breathed. 3 minutes, maybe 3.5. Hal had been at the shelter 6 years. He had watched a lot of people try to approach that kennel, including the handler she'd bitten. He had seen professional trainers, experienced volunteers, a vet tech who competed in protection sports on the weekends. None of them had gotten within 10 feet of her in 11 days. He looked at Roland's hands on the dog and felt a small, cold shift in the back of his mind, the sensation of a question forming before you have the language for it. He turned and walked back up the corridor to the front desk, where Cora was updating intake records. "Pull the original paperwork on that Malinois," he said. "The whole file, whatever came in with her transfer." Phil Dawson's voice arrived before he did. "Who authorized a civilian inside the isolation enclosure?" He came through the corridor door with the particular walk of a man who has never had to hurry because rooms have always rearranged themselves around him. Shoulders square, chin up, a manila folder tucked under one arm, mid-40s. The kind of tan you get from standing at job sites without doing any of the work. He stopped at the gate to the concrete yard and looked at Roland the way you size up something occupying space you consider yours. Roland was crouched beside the dog. One hand rested on her flank, flat and easy. He did not look up immediately. He finished what he was doing, which appeared to be nothing more than letting the dog breathe against his palm. And then he rose, unhurried, and turned toward the gate. "He asked to see her," Hal said from the corridor entrance. He had the dog's folder in both hands now, and he was doing something with his eyes that he probably didn't know he was doing, looking between Roland and the papers like he was checking a sum that kept coming out wrong. Phil pushed the gate open and stepped into the yard. He did not look at the dog. He looked at Roland. "Sir, this animal is under a liability hold. Active assessment. You should not be in this enclosure, and whoever let you in here has created a significant exposure for the county." He paused, smoothed the front of his jacket. I also need to address the transaction from this morning. The $15 figure on the adoption form. That was a data entry error on a standard template. It does not constitute a binding agreement under county procurement guidelines. Roland looked at him. Just looked. His hands came together in front of him, and the keychain was between his fingers. The bleached lure turning once, twice, finding stillness the way a weighted thing eventually finds bottom. I paid the fee, Roland said. Woman at the desk took it. Cora is an intake coordinator. She does not have authority to finalize transactions on animals under active hold. Phil's voice had the quality of someone reading from a policy manual they wrote themselves. This dog bit a trained handler. She failed behavioral assessment twice. Whatever you think you observed in here this morning, our certified evaluators have already reached a determination. Roland looked at the dog. She was sitting now, weight balanced, ears forward, watching Phil with the focused patience of something that has been trained to wait. What determination was that? Roland asked. Euthanasia, Phil said. Scheduled for Friday. The hold exists to protect the public, not to provide opportunities for, he gestured at Roland. At the yard. At all of it. This. The word landed and sat there. Roland did not argue. He did not explain himself. He turned the lure over one more time, and then his hand closed around it, and he put it in his pocket. I'd like to see the file, he said. The original intake file. Not the county assessment. Whatever transferred with her. Phil's mouth opened. Hal, Roland said, without raising his voice. Hal looked down at the folder in his hands. Then he opened it, and that was when his face changed. Not dramatically, just a small shift around the eyes. The expression of a man who has turned over a rock and found something he did not expect to find underneath it. He turned one page, then another. His thumb stopped on something near the back of the file. He looked up at Roland. There's... Hal started, then stopped. He looked at the dog. He looked at Roland again. There's a service record in here, he said quietly. Military intake. I've never seen one of these transfer with an animal. Phil turned toward him. What does it say? Hal didn't answer right away. He was still reading. Phil didn't wait for him. He pulled the incident report from the folder tucked under his arm. A single page, county letterhead, 3 paragraphs, and started reading it the way men in his position read things, like the words were already proof of something. Handler contact. Unprovoked aggression. Bite severity rated level 3. He looked up at Roland. That's not a nervous dog. That's a dangerous one. Roland had not moved from where he was standing. His weight was settled back, arms loose, the keychain lure turning once between his thumb and forefinger before his hand dropped to his side. Who assessed it? He said. Our staff veterinarian and the intake coordinator. Were either of them trained in working dog behavior? Phil's mouth tightened. They're certified animal welfare professionals. Roland didn't answer. He just looked at the report in Phil's hand with the patience of a man who has read a lot of documents written by people who weren't there. Level 3, Phil continued, finding his footing again, means broken skin, means liability exposure for this county if we transfer an animal with a documented aggression history. The $15 fee was processed under the standard domestic intake schedule. This animal does not qualify. He folded the paper with a clean, bureaucratic crease. I'm not unsympathetic, but I can't let sentiment override a public safety determination. In the back office, Hal hadn't moved. The manila folder was thicker than it should have been. It had come in with the dog on day 1, rubber banded to her vaccination records and filed by a temp worker under the wrong intake number, a KC number instead of the civilian sequence, which is why nobody had looked at it. Hal had found it 20 minutes ago when he was cross-referencing to pull her shot history for the liability audit Phil had requested. The cover sheet was printed on a different stock than county forms, heavier, cream-colored, a federal agency letterhead that Hal didn't immediately recognize. Below it, a transfer document, and below that, a service record. Her name was in there, her designation, a list of deployments rendered in clinical shorthand that Hal had to read twice to understand he was reading it correctly. 3 overseas rotations, 2 classified recovery operations, 1 citation for detection work that had resulted in what the form called a significant force preservation outcome. Which was, Hal was beginning to understand, a formal way of saying she'd found something that would have killed people if she hadn't. He turned the page. There was a commendation attached, not a certificate. An actual military commendation, the original, folded once along a horizontal crease and paper clipped to the inside back cover. He unfolded it carefully because it was old and the fold had worn through to near separation, and he read the language at the top, and then he read the handler's name at the bottom. He read it twice. Then he looked up through the office window at the man standing in the kennel corridor with his hands loose at his sides, listening to Phil Dawson's site liability protocol in a flat, official voice. Hal set the folder down on the desk, picked it up again. His thumb moved across the name at the bottom of the commendation, the way a person touches something they aren't sure is real. Chief Warrant Officer Roland A. Ludwig. In the corridor, Phil had moved on to the specifics of the county transfer agreement, explaining the clause that allowed the facility to revoke a pending adoption under documented safety grounds. He was in the middle of a sentence about insurance riders when Hal appeared at the office doorway. Phil turned toward him. "What does it say?" Hal didn't answer right away. He was still reading. "The county's position," Phil was saying, "is that the insurance carrier has already been notified of the incident classification, and under Section 14 of the liability framework, any adoption transaction involving a documented bite animal is subject to automatic review, which means..." He stopped. Not because anyone interrupted him, because Hal Roth had come through the yard door holding a manila folder, the way you hold something that has changed what you know, and he walked to the center of the concrete yard with the particular deliberateness of a man who has just decided that whatever was happening before he got here no longer matters. "I need everybody to stop talking for a minute." Phil turned. "Hal, we're in the middle of a..." "I know what we're in the middle of." Hal's voice was quiet, not aggressive, just final. "I need a minute." Roland had not moved. Roland had not moved. He was crouched beside the dog, one hand resting along her shoulder. Not gripping, not pressing, just contact. The Malinois had her head up, watching Hal come across the yard, and her ears were forward, in a way they had not been in 11 days. Aware, assessing, not afraid. Hal looked at Roland, then down at the folder, then at Roland again. "This dog came in with a military intake file," he said. "Transfer documentation from a receiving facility. It got misfiled when she came in, 11 days ago." He turned a page. "Her name is Coda. Belgian Malinois, 9 years old. Patrol and detection. Classified unit attachment, 6 deployments." He paused on something. "Commendation for service. The language here is... it's redacted in places, but what's there is..." He stopped again. Phil made a sound of impatience. "Hal, this doesn't change the liability. She recovered 2 soldiers from a collapsed structure," Hal said. Not loudly, just clearly. "After an IED strike, she was the only asset that could get through the debris field. She worked for 4 hours straight." He turned another page. "She was awarded a service commendation. Her handler was awarded one too." The yard was quiet, except for the dog's breathing and the thin sound of wind off the fields past the fence line. "The handler's name is in the file," Hal said. He looked up. His eyes went to Roland and did not move. "It's listed as the primary contact for her post-service placement." He turned the folder so the page faced out, though he was the only one reading it. "Roland Ludwig, Chief Warrant Officer, retired." Phil Dawson said nothing. The intake worker who had followed them out to the yard said nothing. The only sound was the Malinois shifting her weight, leaning a fraction of an inch into Roland's hand. Roland did not straighten, did not look up at Hal, did not make anything of the moment. He just put one hand flat on the dog's flank, over the ridge of her ribs, and when he spoke, his voice was low and even and aimed at no one in particular. She waited longer than she should have had to. Hal closed the folder. Phil opened his mouth, closed it. He was still holding the incident report, his incident report, with its bite classification and its liability language and its automatic review. And he was looking at it the way a man looks at something he built carefully and correctly, and has just been informed was built for the wrong purpose entirely. Roland's thumb moved once across the dog's back. A slow pass. The same economy as everything else he did. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. Coda exhaled, low and long. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for 11 days went somewhere else. Hal set the folder on top of Phil's incident report and said, without particular emphasis, "I think we need to talk about the paperwork." Phil opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the folder. Hal didn't look at him. He looked at the pages, and he read. "Military working dog," he started, his voice careful, the way a man reads something he is not sure he understands. "Belgian Malinois, female, designated Coda, certified patrol and detection, dual purpose. Deployed," he paused. "Unit designation classified. Service record, 4 deployments, 41 operational taskings. 2 confirmed find and alert events, credited with preventing mass casualty." He turned a page. "Commendation citation, awarded." Another pause. Longer this time. "Also classified. Reason for separation from service, handler medical discharge." The yard was quiet except for a pigeon moving along the gutter above the chain link. Hal turned one more page. "Primary handler." He stopped, looked up at Roland, looked back down. "Primary handler, Roland Ludwig, Chief Warrant Officer 3, service, 22 years. Phil said, "That doesn't change the liability." "Phil." Hal said it without heat, without volume, just said the name, and Phil stopped. Coda was leaning into Roland's leg. Not hard, just enough. Roland's hand rested on her flank, not moving, the way you rest a hand on something you have not touched in a long time and are afraid to press too hard for fear of what the feeling costs you. Hal set the folder down slowly. He looked at Roland the way you look at a man when you have just learned something about him that reorders everything you thought you knew from the last hour. He said, "You trained her." Roland didn't answer right away. His thumb moved once across the back of her ear. The practiced route, the old route, the one she leaned into, before he'd even finished the motion. "From 12 weeks, he said. That was all he said. Phil had the incident report in his hand still. The bite record. The liability language he'd been building toward for the last 10 minutes like a man laying bricks. He looked at it. Then he looked at the dog pressed against the leg of the man who had spent 2 decades sending animals like her into places that would never appear in any public accounting of anything. And something happened in his face that was not quite shame and not quite understanding, but lived in the same county as both. He did not apologize. He didn't have the vocabulary for it. Not here. Not in front of a folder like that. Roland looked at him once. Not long. The kind of look that takes inventory and finds the total unremarkable. Then he looked back at the dog. Hal said, "She's been here 11 days. "I know," Roland said. "You came every morning." "Yes." Hal glanced at Phil, and Phil said nothing, which was the most honest thing he'd said since he arrived. Roland put one hand flat on the dog's flank, not gripping, not pressing, just present, and said quietly, to no one in particular, and to everyone at once, "She waited longer than she should have had to." Nobody moved for a moment after that. The pigeon had gone. The shelter's fluorescent hum carried through the open door from the corridor. Hal picked up the folder, set it on top of the incident report. The incident report was on the bottom. That was where it belonged. Phil looked at the folder, then at Roland, then at the concrete between his shoes. He had walked in here with authority arranged around him like furniture. He was still standing in the same room, but the furniture was gone, and he was just a man in a county polo shirt who had almost euthanized a decorated military working dog in front of her original handler. He hadn't been told he was wrong. He didn't need to be. "You want a demonstration." Roland said it the way a man repeats back a radio transmission to confirm he heard correctly. Flat, no inflection. Phil had recovered enough to cross his arms. He was looking at the dog the way men look at a liability that has briefly become interesting. "If this animal is going to leave this facility under county authorization, I need documentation of behavioral soundness. That's procedure." Roland didn't answer right away. He was crouching beside the Malinois, one hand resting on her flank, and he looked at her the way a man reads a map he helped draw. Her breathing had slowed. Her ears were tracking Phil's voice without urgency. 11 days of kennel stress, and she had come back to him in 4 minutes. The shelf life of that training didn't expire. He had always known it wouldn't. He stood up, unhurried. "Give us the yard," he said. Hal stepped to the side. Phil didn't move immediately, then did, the way a man moves when he realizes he has already lost the argument and is only now catching up to that fact. Roland unclipped the leash and let it hang from his left hand. He didn't look at the dog. He exhaled once, slow and even, and his right hand dropped to his side with 2 fingers extended. She sat, not fast, not theatrical. She simply organized herself into the correct position, as though the command had always been in the air, and she had only been waiting for it to arrive. Then Roland spoke. Not English, not the handler shorthand that civilian trainers use. The commands came in Dutch, the operational language her training had been built on, the one her nervous system was wired to from the beginning, before any of the transfers, or the kenneling, or the 11 days of silence. He gave the heel command, and she moved with him, tight on his left side, her gait matching his without tension in the lead. He stopped. She stopped. He changed direction without cue, and she adjusted, reading his body the way a partner reads a partner. Hal watched from the doorway with the folder still open in his hands. Phil watched from behind the safety of 6 feet of distance. Roland took her through the full sequence. Obedience first. Sit, down, stay, recall. Each transition clean and immediate. Then he moved to detection work. He had nothing to hide objects in, so he used what he had, the fishing lure from his keychain. He palmed it, moved to 3 different positions along the yard wall, and on the 3rd pass crouched and placed it low behind a drainage post. He stood and gave the search command. 1 word, 2 syllables, the same word he had used with her on the first day he ever put her in harness. She worked the yard in a systematic grid. No wasted motion. No anxiety. Her nose dropped at the drainage post, and she sat beside it and looked at Roland. Not at the lure, at him. That was the part that nobody else in the yard understood. That final look. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't stimulus and response. It was a dog reporting to her handler that the job was done, the way a soldier checks in after a clearance, the way it had always been between them. Roland walked over and picked up the lure. He held it for a second, then clipped it back to the keychain. He didn't say anything to Phil. He didn't look at Phil. He picked up the leash, reattached it with 1 practiced motion, and walked back toward the building. The dog moved with him like she had never stopped. Behind him, Phil said something about reconsidering the valuation on the paperwork in light of the dog's apparent operational status. Roland kept walking. Hal stood at the corridor window and watched. Phil was behind him somewhere, pen moving across the countersigned form with the particular silence of a man who has run out of language. Hal didn't turn around. What was happening in the yard held him there, the way a thing holds you when you understand you are watching something that doesn't happen very often. Roland had not looked back at any of them. He walked to the center of the concrete yard, crouched once, and the dog came to him without a command, just closed the distance and pressed her muzzle against the side of his knee. He let her. Didn't reach for her immediately. Just let her make the contact she had been waiting 11 days to make, with something that smelled like belonging. Then he sat down. Not crouched, not knelt. Sat, right there on the cold concrete. 1 leg out, 1 knee up, the way a man sits when he is not performing anything for anyone. The dog circled once and settled beside him, her flank against his thigh, her graying muzzle turning up toward his face. He put 1 hand flat on her side. The other hand went to his jacket pocket, found the keychain, and was still. He said something. Hal couldn't hear it through the glass. He watched Roland's mouth move. Just a few words, quiet enough that even the dog had to lean in to catch them. And Hal, who had been trying since morning to figure out why this man felt like something he should already know, finally had the answer, and it wasn't in the file. It was in the weight of the hand on the dog's flank. It was in the fact that Roland didn't look relieved. He didn't look like a man who had won. He looked like a man who had come a long distance to keep a promise that should have been kept years ago, and the distance was not geographical. Hal turned the folder over in his hands without looking down at it. The file said 11 years of service. It said 3 overseas deployments to theaters that had no public name. It said commendation for actions Hal couldn't read because the text had been redacted to a long gray bar. And at the bottom of the intake form, in the space marked primary handler, it said Roland Ludwig, CW3, and below that, in smaller type, it said handler separated due to medical retirement, and below that, in the field marked recommended disposition, someone had written, in blue pen, long before this shelter ever saw her, reunify if possible. Someone had written that years ago, and then she had ended up here, in an isolation kennel on the edge of a county that didn't know what she was. 11 days. In the yard, Roland said something else. Just a few words. His hand moved once along the dog's spine. The same flat palm economy he'd used at the fence every morning for 4 days. The same motion that had brought her across the yard when nothing else could. The dog exhaled. Her whole body shifted lower, closer. The way an animal settles when it has finally decided it is done running from something. Hal set the folder down on the windowsill. Whatever Roland said to her out there, whatever it cost him, it was not for the building to keep. It was between the handler and the dog, and it had been waiting in the specific silence of unfinished things for a long time. Hal said nothing. He just stood at the window while the cold morning light came flat across the concrete yard and lay over both of them. The old man in the wheat-colored jacket and the graying Malinois who had found, on the 12th day, the one person she had never stopped waiting for. 3 days later, Roland's truck came up the gravel drive just before dusk, and she was already at the top of the porch steps when he cut the engine. Not pacing, not whining, just sitting with her weight settled and her ears forward, watching the long drive the way she had been trained to watch. Reading distance, reading movement, reading threat, reading him. He sat in the cab a moment before he got out, because he wanted to look at her up there, in the yellow light from the porch, with her graying muzzle and her squared shoulders, and the particular dignity of a working dog who has been given back her purpose. He got out, walked to the steps, crouched in front of her the way he always had. Flat palm, no wasted motion, weight low and easy. She pressed her head into his hand. That was all. The porch light held them both in its small yellow circle, the gravel drive stretching behind him into the dark. Nothing left out there that either of them needed to watch for anymore. She had her handler, he had his dog. The rest of it, the paperwork, the silence in that concrete yard, the years between, settled quietly into the ground, the way old things do when they are finally finished.